It started with going to the doctor and saying, I want to get off the medicine. My doctor literally told me I will never walk again if I do that. I looked at her and I said, I'm not walking now.
Right.
Like,
right.
I had nothing to
Nothing
lose.
to lose. Welcome back to the show. I am Remington Ramsey, and this is Gina Tufano from the DC market, where you did not always reside. You kind of started fresh out there in DC, and that's part of your story. But you've been through quite the series of events since jumping into real estate. But first off, thanks for joining us, Gina.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
We will start with kind of your background getting so you're born and raised in New Jersey and you moved to DC in 94 and then you got licensed at the age of 96 or not the age of 96 and 96.
That's about how old I feel now after this many years of real estate.
Age of 21 in 96 before you bought a house, before you knew anything about real estate. What was it like jumping into the game so new, so fresh?
So back then, it was 2 months before we actually had the MLS online. So my first 2 months, it was still a book. There were no cell phones. There was no, there were map books. There was no Google. And there was no sense of, there was a lot of gatekeeping. There was way more gatekeeping than we have today. Information was just not available. So as a young kid coming into the office, there were a lot of people that just sat there and covered their papers. Like, I'm not going to show you what I do.
Yeah.
So a little different than the landscape today.
Well, you didn't have a niche. You weren't from DC and you never bought a house. So you just kind of, trial by fire.
I didn't know any better. Yeah. So I think there's a point when I was just doing what I was told. I was so young that I didn't have all the limiting beliefs stacked in my head. It was just do this. Okay, I'll do this. So I didn't know any better. I just so it worked is my point when you don't get in your own way.
Well, and so we're about to jump into the chaos of your story when you hit 29. But 8 years into real estate, had you seen success before any of the trauma happened?
Yes. So it took about 5 years for me to consider it a success. That first year lost money, second year made a few $1,000s. About 5 years in, I was making a good business. And by the time that happens, I had already had a team. I already had people working for me. So.
Right. And a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about scaling down. And it's not a concept that I think a lot of realtors like to hear because it's always more is better. And that's just not always the case. But when you turned 29, you were diagnosed with MS and you were told you would be in a wheelchair. You didn't want to believe it and ended up after doing everything the doctors told you, you wound up 2 years later in that wheelchair while you were averaging 100 transactions per year.
It was about 9 or 10 years.
Okay, so I'm all, yeah. I mean, 10 years.
Difference.
Yeah, that is a difference. So 10 years before. So you actually had your kids in the midst of this trauma, right? So like you had your third child and
when I had my third child, I had him in 2011. He was 6 weeks old and I couldn't walk.
So what goes through your mind when you're, because I have family members that have MS and what I know to be true about it is that there's varying degrees, right? And for you that the part that you didn't obviously want to reach was that wheelchair, which happened. And so I'm wondering what's going on in your mind as for over that course of that 10 years, as you're having kids, how are you dealing with that mentally?
In the very beginning, I told my husband to leave me. I thought it was the end of the world. Nobody should be around me. I was damaged goods. That was probably the first year. The anxiety was through the roof. It was bad. It wasn't good. And then I just decided this was my lot in life. So everybody has their thing, right? Like you start to realize that everyone has their thing they have to get over. And this was mine. So it took about a year though to get into
Yeah.
that. And then when my last son was born, he was about 6 weeks, almost to the day. It was practically spot on. And I just couldn't get out of bed one day. And with a 10-year history, I thought it would be temporary,
Yeah.
because the worst thing about MS, I think, is it's unpredictable. It's invisible and it's
Yeah.
unpredictable. So that sort of, you're always a little scared that the other shoe is going to drop, and you have to be able to let that go to live your life. But at that point, the shoe dropped.
So, if can you kind of give the listeners a glimpse into what MS actually does? I mean, a little bit of the science of it and how it affects the body and the mind.
So the best guess from the powers that be, nobody really knows anything. It's an autoimmune disease. It attacks the myelin, which is the sheath around your nerves. So picture an electric cord, the wires in the middle and the rubbers around it. It attacks the rubber. So it's in your brain and your spinal cord, and wherever it attacks is where you have symptoms. So it's wildly unpredictable. It has areas that it typically goes to. And then when it attacks, you have what's called a flare. And so it could be anything. You could just be very tired. You could lose your vision. You could, go numb. There's think of your brain. It controls everything. And then if the attack lasts too long, you get scar tissue and you don't get that thing back.
So what was the first episode after, I guess, even if we were to back up even more, you were 29. So when you went in, what was happening that made you even go get checked in the first place?
So I lost control of my bladder is what it was. At 29 years old, it was like I was a potty training 2-year-old, and it made absolutely no sense to me. I was mortified. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell any friends. I went to the doctor and I'm like, something's wrong. And he's like, oh, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Sends me to a urologist, and he checks everything, and he starts asking me really weird questions. And I'm like, he goes, it's a long shot, but I want you to go to a neurologist. And I'm like, okay. Still haven't told anybody, mind you. I was so full of shame over this. Yeah, I was so ashamed, so mortified. I went to the neurologist and I was diagnosed about a month later. Like I had the spinal tap and the MRI and did all the things, which is very quick in the MS world. People usually go on for years before they get a diagnosis. So that was all a whirlwind for me. In hindsight, I had a fair amount of symptoms I ignored. Like I was dropping things all the time. And I honestly just thought I had carpal tunnel from being on the computer too much. I was dizzy all the time. I thought it was because I was on this diet trying to lose weight. Like I blamed a lot of things on other things. I was clumsier. I had a lot of cuts and bruises. I was constantly falling, and I thought, oh, I'm getting old, which sounds hilarious to me today. But at 29, I thought 30 was the end of the world.
Yeah.
So I just blamed it on other things. And when you put it all together, I had it. But the one that brought me in was my bladder.
Well, what's fascinating about your story is you did get in that wheelchair, but not to give away the ending, you're not in it anymore. And you started to really do a deep dive, what you told me in the pre-show, into anti-inflammatories. And I mean, I think the pinnacle, at least from what I heard, is that you just decided to do a 5K. And so walk me through the transition of going through a 10-year battle where I'm assuming that if at the end of that 10 years you get put in a wheelchair, it's a downward trajectory. I mean, it has to be a pretty radical change to go from that to deciding to do a 5K. What happened there?
So the couch was pretty much my prison.
Yeah.
And I was there with my youngest son, and used to worry that he would never walk. I couldn't do I couldn't even get on the floor to do tummy time. People used to have to come over to bring me drinks and food in the middle of the day. Like it was bad. Like, and my mental state was in the toilet, and I was doing every single thing the doctors told me. I was doing all the things. I was taking all the medicine, trying all the experimental things.
Yeah.
And one day I am looking out the window and I see someone walking their dog, and I just lose it because I can't walk a dog. I can't. And I started thinking about all the things that I didn't do. Like the regrets just came flooding in. And I just decided enough was enough. I was following the protocol, and the protocol wasn't working. So we needed a new protocol. Like you keep doing the same things over and over again, just like in business. If you're doing one thing and it's not working, yeah, you stick with it long enough to make sure that it's not you and it's the thing, but then you do something else. If you try to avoid follow-up, maybe you should do it.
Yeah. Eat that frog.
I was following the doctor, and I did it for 10 years. I think that's a long time. I followed all the rules, and I was done. So I started Googling. In true entrepreneurial fashion, I did all the things. So I can't tell you, again, on the other side. So I can't tell you exactly which one worked, but it started with going to the doctor and saying, I want to get off the medicine.
Yeah.
My doctor literally told me I will never walk again if I do that.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, I'm not walking now.
Right.
I had nothing to
lose.
So diet was probably the biggest. And I took out all the things, no dairy, no gluten, no meat, I went hardcore raw vegan. They called me nuts and berries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
gathering diet. A gatherer's diet.
Yes. Which was good, but in hindsight on that one, I've also learned you do need more. You can't quite get it all. I couldn't. So that caused other things. Moderation's the key with life, I believe, is the secret sauce on that one. But it worked. And slowly but surely, I was coming off the medicines. I was starting to feel better. My training it started with walking across the room. Like, can I make it up and down the stairs? Can I now sleep in my bedroom? Eventually I graduated to a treadmill, and I would just walk on it as long as I could, and people had to help me off. Like it was a long time. I clearly remember the first time I did a 5K in practice of the the first time I hit that length, it took me 90 minutes on the treadmill. My legs were completely numb when I was done. Like I had to be escorted off, but the tears of joy that I did. I bet. Like it was, so it all fueled it, and it kept going.
Now I know you might not be able to quite identify exactly what it was that got you out of that wheelchair completely, but I'd have to think that the mindset, it started with the mindset.
Absolutely.
You made some drastic changes in diet. You decided to start doing a type of therapy where you're extending and using your legs. But what's going on in your mind? Like, do you remember how long of a period of time between the time you said I am coming off the meds to the time you actually were able to walk? What was that time period?
To walk unassisted, or to actually walk? Like, because to actually get up and take a few steps, that was pretty quick, because I didn't care if it hurt. I didn't care if I was numb. I didn't care what I had to hold on to. I was going to do it. Sure. Mindset was 100%. Everything. Like without that, nothing would have worked. It was a while ago. I want to say it was probably about 4 or 5 months before I could
That seems really fast. That seems like a really fast period of time. Once you decide, you just made it happen.
Oh, yeah. I know the 5, when I actually quote unquote ran, I didn't run it, but when I was in the 5K, I had a group of like 20 people with me. I was pushing the stroller for the baby. I guess he was about 2. And I needed it to hold on for that, but I want to say that was within a year.
So let me ask you something. We've identified that mindset and, the mind over matter concept is what got you mostly out of that wheelchair. Do you feel like there In my notes it says you spent a year just kind of being sad about the diagnosis and eventually got into that wheelchair. With what you know now, do you feel like if you would have applied that same mind over matter principle as you were diagnosed, that you could have avoided the years of suffering in the wheelchair to begin with, or do you feel like you needed to go through that to get to that point?
Personally, I think I needed to go through it. And I think that lesson, or I needed that pain.
Yeah.
Um, I don't anymore. So where I sit today, I have a whole new perspective on suffering, surviving versus thriving.
Yeah.
I literally had it as my identity that I was a survivor. And I
Yeah.
think subconsciously that makes you go through pain. It's not empowering, it's disempowering. We think it's empowering. I'm going to survive. But you're kind of putting out there that you're going to have some sort of trauma that you have to get through. If you peel it back, wouldn't
Yeah.
you rather thrive than survive? Like,
I would.
why create the obstacle? And my identity was I was a survivor.
Yeah.
I have recently come under the hallucination that suffering is selfish.
Mm.
And
Tell me
that,
about that. Why is it selfish?
oh my God, that rocked my world. So suffering is you're looking internal all the time. You're looking at you like, this sucks, whatever, this hurts, I'm in pain, this is bad, that I'm a bad person, I made a mistake, it's all I.
Yeah.
That's incredibly selfish.
Yeah.
How much can you give to other people? How much can you enhance the world, your life, your children, your family, your business? You can't, because
Yeah.
all of your focus is internal. So feeling sorry for yourself, selfish. Suffering, selfish. And so I had the mindset of I'm a survivor. I also had the mindset that I'm not selfish. I'm a giver. So all of a sudden, this is over years, like I'm putting all of it together
Right.
in one
Right. This isn't
bam.
a 10-minute conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. If only, right? If only
Well,
life
what's
worked that
what's
way.
funny about what you're saying is I've often said that's kind of one of the messages I give to our sales team and our realtors is that if you're having a bad day, typically, not always, but if you're having a bad day, it typically is because you're being selfish. You're so focused on what's going on, what someone said to you, the way things are going in your own life. And a great way to get out of that mindset is to love on other people, write handwritten notes, give those texts, and make those calls. And but I always thought that the caveat to that is someone who's truly having a bad day because of unforeseen circumstances like cancer, or in your case, MS. And here you are diagnosed with MS, still saying that, long term, if you are suffering, it's selfish. And that's just fascinating to me.
Oh, it's a choice. And I'm triggered by the word selfish. So for me, that is the most powerful way to stay in a good mindset, personally, because I'm not selfish. I will fight you to the death. I am not selfish. So if I'm not selfish, I can't do those. I don't do those things. It's done. It's just all mindset. It's just done. But I never used to think that. I used to think I'm a survivor. I'm strong. I persevere. And I thought those were good things, and they're not bad, but
Yeah.
they're not empowering. They're disempowering. You're creating, like, life is a roller coaster, and we
Yeah.
all just try to hang on, and it happens. I don't know if
Well,
I
let's
don't
talk
know what
about
kind of,
chapter 2 then. You said
okay.
you wanted to do something you couldn't do before. All of a sudden, you weren't scared. So the notes that I have from Bobby are pretty fat. Like this is a incredible amount of blue ribbons over here. Traveled the world, gave a TED talk, raised hundreds of thousands of charity, board of Habitat for Humanity, ran a marathon, hiked the Grand Canyon rim to rim. So light at the end of the tunnel doesn't even begin to describe it. After being diagnosed, after being put in the wheelchair, you've done all these things. What was your TED talk about?
The whole year, it was called "You're Not the Boss of Me," and it was fear, and it was, what if it all went through the getting out of the wheelchair, but I didn't talk about MS specifically, but I was told that most people would end up in a wheelchair. Most people wouldn't walk again, but that meant some people would. And why couldn't I be the some people? Why did I have to be the most people? And what if fear didn't rule your life? That's the 20 minutes and a 20-second tidbit.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like we should clarify that. And I don't know the answer to this. You know way more about it, being in the field. But do you believe that everyone can have the same reaction to the meds, the same reaction to coming off of coming out of the wheelchair if they do what you do? Or do you feel like it's varying degrees depending on, the diagnosis?
I would say it depends on scar tissue. Like some stuff didn't come back. As great as I am, I haven't been able to feel my thighs for 10 years. I never will. I'm used to it. It just is what it is. So it depends on what your scar tissue is. Scar tissue. We can't really, I don't know how to get around that yet.
Yeah. I like that.
But yes, I do believe every single person on the planet, no matter what they're going through, I have, whether it's cancer, whether it's mindset, is everything. It's everything. And if you change your mindset, suddenly you stop looking for what's wrong and you start looking for what's right. Both are always available. You can always find a pile of horrible things, and you can always find a pile of really, really good things. And once you start looking, you have that shift. It was not optional in my mind. Failure was not even on the table. It was, I'm doing this.
Sure.
And I did. And I think if anyone had such a shift, they would have success, and I say that my legs are still numb because I don't have 100% success. You wouldn't know that looking at me, but I also don't sit there, and I think it's funny, actually.
The mindset success is there 100%. I'll tell you that much, because if you are still dealing with that, and to see the smile on your face and hear how you talk about your life, that's success in my book. And I imagine the end of that marathon and the end of hiking the Grand Canyon was pretty emotional for you.
I can't. So I do a lot of gratitude exercises and stacking and all of that when you stack the good. And if it's a guided and it says, think of a thing, those are two of the things that I pull out of my memory to get that feeling. It was surreal. It was absolutely surreal for different reasons for both of those. The marathon, though, my kids met me on like the last quarter mile and ran with me. Tears of joy. Buckets. I can almost cry now thinking about it. Like, incredible. It was fantastic.
Well, what's fascinating about your story, and I think sometimes when people listen to this podcast, you have it's always real estate, right? It's always realtors who go through something and insert life events, life changes, and then come out on the other side and still do really well and sell a bunch of real estate, and there's a happy ending. For you, the story doesn't end there. The story doesn't end after, chapter 2. Chapter 3 is pretty fascinating to me as well, because eventually your lifestyle kind of caught up to you and you got burned financially and emotionally. And if you don't mind sharing, you got in a little bit of credit card debt, just trying to make ends meet. And we talked earlier about how you have recently been downscaling your business. And so talk us through chapter 3 here. Like what happened there on the backside of all this success?
So hindsight's 2020, right? So I can talk about it at a different level now. Yeah. I can look at it, and my DNA is all over it. I didn't have the skill set to do what I was, I was following the rules. I was scaling the business. I was hiring the people. I was going through some personal challenges at the time. So I decided to 7th level it, which means in Keller speak, I guess I was very Keller at the time. You step out and the team runs itself. You go from operator to owner. Yep. And I did that. and we imploded.
Yeah.
Like imploded. There was very little leadership. I pulled out. I was caught up in my own whatever. And I didn't necessarily have the right people in the right places. You know, they're always the right people, but are they in the right places? And it was horrible. I had no money. I was making the least amount of money I had made in my entire adult life, but yet we're selling 100 houses. You know, on paper, I'm getting all these accolades and awards and things. And in the back, I am borrowing from my 401k.
Yeah.
And it was hard. I blew the whole thing up, everything. I didn't even have an assistant. I had nothing. And I just sat there on the couch. I'm like, okay, now what? Like, I had a good friend who's a broker, you know, been in the business forever, my work husband. And he would call me every day, like, what are you doing to make my, like, I needed to be mindset. I needed to be pushed. My brain needed to be like, okay, this is what we're doing. So when I started rebuilding, it was very slowly. And it was, what do I like to do? As opposed to what, you know, stay in your 20%. My 20% was clients. It wasn't managing a team. That wasn't my 20%.
Right.
So coming back, we were selling half the houses. The team was half the size. I was making twice the money. I had
People need to hear that. That little soundbite will be that. So say that again. You were half the work, twice the money, just because you scaled down.
I scaled down. I had half the people. We were doing half the transactions. I was making twice the money, and I had more time.
Yeah,
and I was happier.
Amazing.
I was happier. I was much, much happier. So the hard part of that, though, like where my ego didn't like it.
I bet. Especially because I'm sure you didn't mean to have an ego, but it'd be really hard not to be a little proud of yourself after coming out of a wheelchair and accomplishing what you did. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I think a certain level of pride is needed.
Well, you get used to a certain level of success too. Like I was used to being on the thing, you know, top agents of the month, top this, top that. And I was used to that to the point where it didn't even resonate with me. I'm like, oh, whatever, another best of Loudon or whatever, you know, like it didn't even resonate with me.
Right.
And then it was gone. And I was like, looking around, is this okay? Am I still okay? Am I still a good person? And that's all
because it becomes part of your identity. Like success is your identity, and a certain vision of what success is.
Yeah.
Becomes your identity.
So that was hard. I'm not even going to pretend that part was easy. And my bank account was happier. My kids were happier. I was happier. Oh, that was a little hard. Yeah.
Well, there's two things I want to finish up with you. The first one is just a question that I've had in the back of my mind this entire interview is especially about diet. This is kind of off topic, but I want to hear you answer it. You changed your diet drastically. You came off the meds and you did certain physical therapy. What is your diet now? Are you still as aggressive about cutting out anti-inflammatories and things that would flare up your multiple sclerosis, or does it come a point where you can be a little bit more relaxed, or what does that look like?
Both is the answer to that. I now take some supplements, which I didn't do then. Then I was like, it has to come from the earth. I was very, so I do take some supplements now. I brought back certain foods. So I'm definitely not, I call myself a recovering vegan. I
love that.
I am very vegetable heavy. I still love vegetables. I'm very vegetable heavy, but I eat eggs. I eat meat. I now eat more meat than I used to because my iron and protein is so important. And, you can only eat so many beans. And so I do eat some meat.
That reminds me, you said recovering vegan. That reminds me of a joke that I heard one time, is that how can you tell if someone's vegan?
They tell you.
They tell you within 5 seconds of meeting you.
Yeah. I'm a recovering vegan.
That's good. That's good. Well, that makes sense. So, okay. So that's cool though, that you, you're constantly growing. I mean, that's got to be the undertone of this entire show, is that you're constantly growing. It's not, okay, I've arrived, I can just do this now. This is who I am now. No, like, you got to keep on evolving. And now you're doing supplements you didn't even hear of 10 years ago. And so
Yeah,
I love that. I love that constant growth.
absolutely.
I want to finish up talking to you about investments. Bobby said you're huge into investments, and it's a side hustle for you, but you're super passionate about it. Tell me about your investments.
So I bought my first one in '04, which I still have. And I
We're talking
wanted
about
to
real
just,
estate, like a house, single family
right.
home. Okay.
A townhouse, new construction. I bought it in '04. It cash flowed positive. It was worth a ton of money in '05, and then in '06, '07, '08, '09, and '10, it was not. But it was cash flow positive, so I kept it. I didn't care,
Yeah.
It still paid the rent. During that time, I did one or two other. I was picking things up here and there, and then so when COVID hit, I had I had three that I had held on to, and my son was 9. I guess he was 9, and I had to do distance learning. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I can't go on appointments. Like, I need a plan B. I can't. What am I going to do? So I just went hardcore. So now I have 17.
I love that. I love it. And they're all long term.
All except for one is an Airbnb that I absolutely adore. Like, I love, it's tiny house. It's on a little over 3 acres.
Yeah.
A little tiny house. The screen and porch is bigger than the house.
Yeah.
There's no TV in it. I don't rent to kids. I do rent to dogs.
Yeah.
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Fire pit, dock, canoe, screen and porch, whatever, all the outdoor things. I love it. It's in a pine forest. Sorry, all the houses, forget about them. This is what fills me up.
Well, I tell you what, Gina, if you're listening to this interview and you're not watching, I would just encourage you to, at some point, hop on YouTube or Instagram and check out the smile on Gina's face. You just light up the room. You light up, the social media room, what have you. But just pure joy. And I appreciate your leadership in that arena, just amidst turmoil and chaos. And we obviously don't have enough time on the show to dig into everything that's going on in the world. But just in your own world, to be given that diagnosis and to come out on top and to continue fighting and continue reinventing yourself was just truly inspirational. And I appreciate you sharing your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I could talk forever. I'm just so full of gratitude for all of it. And I'm not selfish, so I'm not going to feel sorry for myself ever again.
If we want to find you or the things that you're into, your TED Talk, where would we find all that?
It's all available on my personal website, not the business website, which is my name, GinaTufano.com.
All right. You can find that details in the description of this podcast. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.